and investment. Rob Blackie is Liberal Democrat candidate for May's London mayoral election. Zoe Strimpel is a columnist for the Sunday Telegraph, and Kirsty Blackman, the SNP MP for Aberdeen North and the party's Cabinet Office spokesperson in Westminster. 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850 or say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC, and do watch us on Global Player.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration has been sacked, with the Home Office claiming he breached the terms of his appointment. Lucy Fisher is Whitehall editor at the Financial Times. She's told LBC it's after David Neil raised concerns about security checks.
He said that 100% of jets that are deemed high risk should be checked, and that last year only 21% were, meaning that criminals, illegal immigrants, trafficking victims and extremists may have been among those who could have entered the country.
Immigration Minister Tom Pursglove says the Home Office categorically rejects the claims. The Prince of Wales is calling for conflicts in the Middle East to end as soon as possible. Prince William says there's a desperate need for increased humanitarian support in Gaza. A body has been pulled from the River Thames in London, which police believe to be the suspect involved in a chemical attack in Clapham. They've been looking for Abdullah Zaidi since his former partner was left with life-changing injuries last month. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 9 points at 77.19. The pound buys $1.26 and €17.
LBC Weather.
With Ripple Energy. Climate action you can be proud of.
Light rain in the south tonight, clear and cold in the north with heavy rain and strong winds later, a low of 1. A wet and windy start tomorrow, a drier and brighter afternoon, a high of 13. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. It's 2 minutes past 8. With me on the panel are Zoe Strimpel, columnist for the Sunday Telegraph. She's sitting to my right. Next to her, Rob Blackie, Liberal Democrat candidate for May's London mayoral election. We just worked out that we first met about 16, 18 years ago when I was explaining to his company how blogging works. I mean, how time flies, Rob. On my left, we have Kirsty Blackman, SNP MP for Aberdeen North and the party's Cabinet Office spokesperson in Westminster, and next to her Sir Conor Burns, Conservative MP for Bournemouth West and the Prime Minister's trade envoy to the United States for regional trade and investment. They're all here to take your calls. Lots to talk about today. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call here on LBC.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
And of course, do watch us on Global Player if you'd like to. Now, Andy in Hampton Court is our first caller. Andy, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, hi Iain and everyone there. I need a bit of help, actually. I've got my opinions on what's going on, and I'm not going into the ins and outs of, the war or, how it's playing out. But my question is, really, I'm confused about the difference between anti-Semitism and actually being opposed to what Netanyahu's government is doing, because in my mind they're two totally different things. But it seems that every time you kind of, say, I don't agree with what Israel's doing, you're classed as anti-Semitic, which in my mind is wrong. It's like saying if you're anti-Trump, you're anti-American. It's the same thing. So, I'd like some answers to that question.
Zoe Strimpel.
Yes, I'm going to dive in on that one because it's a very good question, important question, something that has preoccupied a lot of my attention for the last few years since Jeremy Corbyn actually became leader of the Labour Party. So you're absolutely right that criticising the Israeli government or the state is completely legitimate. I mean, Israelis themselves are massively divided over what Israel should be doing. Many of them absolutely loathe the government, loathe Netanyahu. That's kind of normal. Where it seeps into anti-Semitism is where you get to delegitimization, demonization, and comparisons with the Holocaust, with the Nazis. So that should be a kind of red flag when people start in on the language about Netanyahu is a Nazi, or what Israel's doing in Gaza is genocide, like the Holocaust was done unto them. They're doing it. That is right there with the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. So if you feel yourself thinking, I don't like Netanyahu, or I don't think Israel's ground offensive is effective, or whatever, that's one thing. But it becomes anti-Semitism when you find yourself coming up with arguments that deny Israel the right to self-defense, to secure borders, and which portrays the Jews of Israel in the same way that one would portray the Nazis of Nazi Germany. That's my answer.
Rob?
Well, I think the important thing to remember is anti-Semitism is just another form of racism, and it's just as evil and disgusting as any other form of racism. And I think if you know you're being anti-Semitic very easily, so if you substituted in the name of another group of people and saw, are you treating all people as a group unfairly in some way, then that's clearly a form of racism. And as Zoe says, it's entirely legitimate to criticise the government of Israel, and inside Israel there are huge demonstrations, including from the families of the people who've been kidnapped by Hamas, who are very unhappy with what the government of Israel has been doing. And I think that's entirely legitimate. But if you cross the line, if you're a racist...
I think just to add, and then I'll shut up, but the thing is, well, I actually don't agree. I think anti-Semitism is not just another form of racism. It has its own logics. And the thing that is, but that's not to minimize other forms or relativize. It's just, it is a bit different. But the history plays differently with each ism. With Israel and anti-Semitism, it's obviously a little bit more, it's a bit more high stakes, and it's a bit different from almost every other scenario because of the history of Jewish persecution throughout all of history, basically, and then the emergence and the formation of Israel in the wake of the Holocaust. So that makes the status of Israel a little bit closer to anti-Semitism, the way it's discussed, than other minorities. For instance, it would be difficult, most other minorities in the West have many, many different states that are their that could be said to be where they might, their heritage might lie. So that history, I think, is something if those who kind of disregard that history, they might be, or insult it, they might be getting into anti-Semitism.
Conor Burns.
So I agree with absolutely everything that's been said so far. We have a large Jewish community in Bournemouth, we always have. And when you talk to them, many of whom, by the way, are critical of some of the actions that the current Israeli government are doing, and some of whom were critical of things that were happening before the events we're seeing now, they feel frightened because they're Jewish. They say there's been a difference in the way that they are perceived, and they worry about their own safety and their kids' safety, and that's because they're Jewish. And that's not born out of a rational, dispassionate foreign policy or military decision that the government of Israel's taken. It's because too many people are saying it's the Jews again. And I think that's the difference that Andy is really asking about. If you want to understand what anti-Semitism is, it's when reason and rationality depart and you blame the religion.
We had a caller in the last hour who made all sorts of ridiculous allegations, but one of them was that the Zionists control the world's media. And so I decided to cut him off because I thought, well, that is a classic anti-Semitic trope. Now, he would deny that, and I had another caller then phone in to kind of defend him and say, well, you can't say just because you're anti-Israel, you're anti-Semitic. No, of course you can't. But if you start uttering things like that, which just play into these conspiracy theories, to me, that is blatant anti-Semitism. Kirsty?
Yeah, I do feel slightly uncomfortable trying to answer this question because I'm not Jewish. And, actually, say, in order, Andy, for you to get a really informed answer, I would do something like look up the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust and look up what they say about the definitions of anti-Semitism and the difference between anti-Israeli sentiment and anti-Semitic views. I think in terms of what Conor was saying there is a long history of persecution and a long history of hatred towards Jewish people, and it is realistic and understandable that people are fearing for themselves, fearing for their families and their communities as a result of the increase in the kind of hatred that there currently is towards Jewish people. But I met with the Union of Jewish Students and representatives from Aberdeen's group of Jewish students, and they were concerned about some of the language that had been used around the campus, some of the language that was being used by various groups around the uni campus. And some of those people were using that language not at all thinking that they were being anti-Semitic or not understanding what all of that language meant. So the most important thing is to do what Andy's trying to do here, which is to educate yourself to find out actually which of these things are offensive, which are anti-Semitic, which cause real problems for Jews in the Jewish community. I think that's absolutely the right thing to do here, but I would agree with all of the comments that anti-Israel and anti-Semitism are two different but sometimes linked things.
Let's go back to our caller. Andy, what do you make of what you've heard?
Well, everyone's missed the point. All I'm saying is that one should be allowed to have an opinion about the actions of a country without being anti.
But that's what they've all said.
I've worked in that country. I have loads of Israeli friends. I'm not anti-Israeli. I don't think about race. I'm not racist at all. I've worked all over the world, doing what I do, and I just find it extraordinary that you can't have an opinion about what is happening in Israel without being classed as being anti-Semitic, because actually I just see it as being anti-democratic. That's what I think.
But Andy,
I don't really understand
I'm not sure there's something wrong with your connection, because that's literally what every single one of us said, that you have to differentiate the policy of the State of Israel, the current government of Israel, from sentiment towards Jewish people.
Also, it's very, literally everybody has an opinion about what's going on, and there are mass demonstrations every single week against Israel. It's completely par for the course to express the kinds of opinions that you're saying get you branded as anti-Semitic. So maybe it's the way you're doing it, but if not, then it seems like completely by the by. Everyone's doing it.
Quite a few people on text having go at you, Zoe, for saying that you're creating a hierarchy of
I saw that.
isms.
They obviously didn't listen to what I said, which was there is no essentially, I'm not saying one is worse than the other, but they are different. And if that's what when you say the logics of anti-Semitism are different, if that immediately makes people think I'm saying there's a hierarchy and Jewish lives are more important than the lives of people of African origin or whatever, that is not what I'm saying. But I do say they are different. And when Israel is involved, it is different because of the Jewish history, and I'm sorry, but that is a distinctive history. And when it comes to people who've been persecuted in the West and in Europe, I'd say Jews probably do come at top of the hierarchy. And you know what? It's not a hierarchy any Jew wants to be at the top of.
Before we go to a break, let's talk about this vote that's going to be held tomorrow. It's an SNP opposition day, and they've put down a motion demanding an immediate ceasefire in Israel. Labour has now countered with their motion, which is very, very detailed, it has to be said. A lot of people are saying that both parties are just playing politics with this, and it's all a bit ridiculous, Kirsty.
I mean, nobody's playing politics with this. The reality is that this is one of the biggest issues in the world right now. This is something that many...
Who in Israel or Gaza gives a damn as to what the SNP or Labour say about these things?
I mean, it's possibly quite important that the next Prime Minister has a sensible view around ceasefire. If we're going to have...
Stephen Flynn is the next Prime Minister.
I mean, I'm not sure Stephen Flynn would be very happy if he was the next Prime Minister, and the electoral maths probably doesn't add up on that. But, it's realistic for Labour to have a good position on this, and they've moved towards a ceasefire now. Their amendment specifically states that, which is different from the position that they had in November. And I'm really pleased that they have come to this position. I think it's really important. And it's reasonable for the SNP to bring this up because it is flooding our inboxes.
So are you going to support their amendment?
What is likely to happen tomorrow is that there's now a government amendment in, and my understanding is that the government amendment will be up against the SNP motion, but I'm not 100% sure. Depends how the standing order.
So Labour's one falls by the wayside because the government have put one down.
My understanding is that that's what's likely to happen tomorrow, but I'm not the speaker, so I don't make these decisions.
So basically, Labour are back to square one and deciding whether to support your motion.
Indeed. And I've heard various different things on that. I've heard that they were not going to support it. I've heard that they're going to abstain. My understanding is that the current position is that they are going to not support it. But you know, who knows what will actually happen tomorrow? But we are in the morally correct position that we have been in since November. We have been putting the forward calls for immediate ceasefire since November. And how many, so many people are dying. We need this to happen.
Conor Burns, are all parties slightly dancing on the head of a pin here, where the Labour Party calling for a humanitarian ceasefire? David Cameron has called for something vaguely similar, I think. Do you see this as very different from what the SNP are demanding?
Well, the first thing, I think, Iain, is that you sort of hit the nail on the head. There's something quite quaint about all of this. If you're in Gaza or the West Bank and you're in the fortunate position to have radio reception and listening to us debating various incarnations of motions and sequencing in Parliament, it's not going to make much difference to you at all. I think Kirsty said the SNP have wanted a ceasefire from the very beginning. We were very clear that Israel had the right to respond to the heinous events that took place, that Israel has a legitimate ambition to decommission. They can't eliminate Hamas because Hamas is an ideology. It's not just a military presence, but decommission its military might, its ability to strike the state of Israel. But you couldn't be human and watch what's going on and not want there to be a cessation. You could not be human and not question the sense on the next phase that Israel is describing in Rafah. So yes, I do think that broadly there is probably a coalition in Parliament wanting the same thing. The question is how you bring that about.
Right, we're going to move on in a moment. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
With us on Cross Question, Conservative MP Sir Conor Burns, Rob Blackie from the Liberal Democrats, he's a candidate for London Mayor, Zoe Strimpel is a candidate for no one but the Sunday Telegraph, and Kirsty Blackman is the SNP MP for Aberdeen North and their Cabinet Office spokesperson in Westminster. Right, let's go to Stephen in East Grinstead, who has an interesting question. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Iain. Good evening to you and your guests. Do the panel believe Kemi Badenoch will deliver a first-class service regarding fully compensating the wronged sub-postmasters, or will she and the government fail to deliver on their promises?
Rob Blackie.
It's not looking good. The post office scandal has been going on for decades now. Some of the people first had problems with the computer system really 20 years ago now. It's taken many, many years to win their court case, and now it's been 6 years since they won their court case, and they still haven't had any compensation.
Well, they have. I mean, some of them have.
Well, yeah, but not...
There are three different schemes.
Yeah, but not the significant compensation people, I think, can reasonably expect when your name has been dragged through the mud, when often you've had severe financial problems and you've been waiting for very many years. I think it's quite reasonable to expect the government to do this very quickly, to bring some money up front and then move the rest of the process faster. So far, obviously, there are allegations that the government are dragging their feet over this, and it would seem quite likely.
But why would they? I mean, what's in it for the government to drag their feet?
You're talking about thousands of people and possibly hundreds of thousands of compensation each. Certainly in for hundreds of millions of pounds quite quickly, maybe even in for billions of pounds.
But the Post Office have budgeted for this, haven't they?
Well, it's still owned by the government, so it's still essentially government money that's being spent. It's a big problem. £1 billion is big money.
But if I was Kemi Badenoch, and there's a thought, I would want to get this done and dusted way before the election, so I could take the credit as a cabinet minister that sorted this out.
Well, we'll have to hope that's what happens. There's not much sign of that yet, is there?
Conor Burns.
Well, so look, I think to Stephen's question, yes, I think Kemi is determined to sort this out. This has been a shambles for a very, very long time. One of the points I sort of made yesterday in the House, the Post Office misled successive Post Office ministers who frankly should have been more inquiring and asking questions than mastering the departmental brief. And it's regrettable, and that's the wrong word actually, it's appalling, that it took a television programme to turbocharge this. It's just not correct to say that the compensation isn't going out. It is, and a large amount of it has gone out already.
Do you feel that the postmasters feel that it's going fast enough?
No, and I think the Secretary of State wants to increase it, but it's not fair to say that nothing is happening. There's 2,700 wrong postmasters already been in receipt of a total of 160 million. There's another 27 that's gone out through the GLO scheme, but it's not fast enough. And the Secretary of State yesterday was really clear. And I thought, anybody listening to her, and
she didn't hold back, did she?
She didn't. And bearing in mind that if you not just mislead Parliament, if you deliberately mislead Parliament, that's a career-ending moment. She was pretty clear in where she wanted to get to and what had happened. And the other thing to remember is that there were non-executive directors representing the sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses on the Post Office board who were saying, as recently as days before Kemi sacked the chairman, that there was still a culture in the Post Office that somehow these people were guilty and on the take and in the wrong. So I think the government is absolutely determined to get to the bottom of this, and I hope they do it quickly.
Well, it's interesting you raise non-executive directors there, because I would question as to what those non-executive directors were doing all of that time, because part of their remit is to keep an eye on the executives and the policies that they're implementing. Kirsty Blackman.
I mean, it is a horrific mess. It has dragged out, and actually I think the point that was made about the fact that it took a TV programme for anything to happen. I mean, we've had MPs in the House of Commons, so Marion Fellows from our party has been chair of one of the co-chairs of the group on Horizon, and she's been, I'm pretty sure she's been banging on about this for a long time.
Well, Jackie Smith, my friend, former Home Secretary, she asked the first parliamentary question on this back in 2009.
I mean, exactly. It's been going on for such a long time, and it's not for lack of trying from some of the MPs, but it's just this obfuscation and the lies and everything that went on. But, you know, the reality is it's as out in the open as, you know, as it can be now, and it just needs to happen. We just, I mean, you know, I do not have the biggest amount of faith in Kemi Badenoch. I think we disagree on almost everything it's possible to disagree on. However, you know, if she can get it done, you know, that's good. I'm really, you know, I think the whole House, everybody in Parliament is in agreement that this needs to get sorted out. It needs to get sorted out quickly, and people need to get that redress. And they also need, you know, you mentioning the fact that the culture in the post office of thinking that some of these folk are guilty, right? They also, it needs to be made absolutely clear in no uncertain terms that they are not. So not just the compensation, but also that reputational, life-ruining issues that they've had as a result of the convictions or as a result of being under that level of suspicion. That needs to, you can't undo it, but it needs to be gone.
Another thing which I don't understand is that the Chief Financial Officer, who was appointed in 2015, is still there, doing the same job. And he must have been one of the people, I mean, he was apparently Paul Lavenel's right-hand man. Why hasn't he been got rid of? I ask myself, but I never get an answer.
I probably can't give you that precise answer, but I think, it's sort of shocking how egregious morally this whole thing has been. I mean, the damage to people's lives, in fact, people who took their lives or whatever, you know, it's like it really couldn't be worse. It couldn't reflect more badly on the justice system, on everything that Britain is supposed to be a kind of absolute bastion of and proud of. So, I mean, I think here we have this kind of conflict between the blob on one hand and the kind of this vast system that's always going to be sluggish in terms of doing the right thing and mobilising what needs to be done fast. And this kind of huge, heinous kind of moral debt that is owed to these people. But also, you know, it's a part. I'm sure this is happening, but reflecting and digging into how a miscarriage of justice on that scale could have happened, and it can't just be post office.
Well, it happened because bad people did nothing. They knew what was going on, and yet they still did nothing. And I'd like to think anyone on this panel that if we discovered that some huge computer system was disadvantaging a lot of people in a drastic way within our organisation, we would try and do something about it, but nobody did.
But outside the post office, I'm sure there are many, many players in the legal system that still allowed, you know, doubt to be dismissed, and, you know, just based on watching the ITV dramatization, it doesn't, you know, there are bits of the legal infrastructure that I think might, you know, that's what I'm saying. I think there's like an inquiry that can go beyond this particular organisation.
Courts tend to accept computer-based evidence as being
that
the
needs
law,
to be rethought,
as being fact. And the truth is, computer systems break because they're built by human beings, but courts still take that as an idea they go with, and I think that's something you've got to go with. And actually, as we move towards artificial intelligence used more in government, actually a lot of the time you can't tell why an AI computer has taken a decision at all. So there's no way to audit it. And if we don't bring in better laws on that, we're going to end up with many more scandals.
I think there's also a question, isn't there, about the role and our process of government. There's a pretty high threshold for MPs to seek meetings on behalf of constituents with ministers to highlight things. And repeated colleagues across Parliament sought to speak to repeated ministers and said something is wrong here. And ministers, and not singling out anybody, but ministers repeatedly fell back on what they were being told.
But you've been a minister.
Yes.
You will have been in this situation where instinctively you might think that there's something not quite right here. And then a team of civil servants come in and they reassure you, Minister, everything's absolutely fine, nothing to worry about at all, you just leave it to us. Now, it takes quite a brave minister to go against the advice that you are given by civil servants. Have you ever had to do that?
Yes.
Where you just say, I'm sorry, I hear what you say, but I don't agree with you.
Yes.
We're going to do it this way.
Not, I don't agree with you, we're going to do it this way, purely based on my own view, but I have been in a position where I've gone out and sought independent, views. Mrs. Thatcher always used to do this. She was notorious for ringing up industrialists.
She was leader of the opposition in her own government.
That's right, wasn't she? She was very proud of it. But she would ring up industrialists and say, what's actually going on, and had alternative information flows. And I remember, for example, when I was in trade, we were setting up these strategic trade advisory groups, and it was all the same people who were being recommended, who were all within the little bubble. The ID, the CBI, the TUC. And I wanted to get some people who were actually at the front line of the export business. And we went out and found some people. But yes, you have to be determined. And I think, I remember the Institute of Government talking about this. There ought to be more training for ministers before they go in on what it's like. It's like also, unlike anything you've ever done before.
It's also very hard to break in from the outside and understand things, because government is very good at covering up information. I find as my role as mayoral candidate, I asked Transport for London questions and they just basically refused to answer them.
Sorry.
The law says they should. Of course, they're very, very good at dragging their heels for years on end.
How much do you think is it about wanting an easy life versus just not knowing what to do?
That's an interesting question. I think sometimes some people, and one of the things I've always found striking across the whole arena is how many people end up in politics not actually believing in very much, other than being in politics and being in office. I think the civil service, who are very good, by the way, on the whole, are very good at keeping ministers extremely busy, with not a lot of time to think and not a lot of control over their own diary and who they're seeing.
But there should have been, I think the point is good, there should have been an institutional knowledge. A civil servant should have been aware, or the department should have been aware. 17 MPs have come to us about 17 different constituents with this thing. You can't expect every minister to know all the meetings that the minister before had.
That's right.
But you should be able to expect the department to have an oversight on that, and to be able to say, look, this is unusual. And, you're absolutely right. I think I can count on one hand the number of meetings I've had with ministers about issues, and it's only the very most serious issues that I would actually even seek a meeting with a minister about. So that should have been raising red flags, and it clearly wasn't.
This is what I love. SNP Tory consensus on this programme. You don't get that in any other programme, do you? It won't last. No. It's 8:32 on LBC. Let's get the latest news headlines from Charlotte Morgan.
The US has blocked a UN resolution demanding an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. The White House would rather see a temporary ceasefire linked to the release of hostages held by Hamas. The Home Office says the Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, David Neal, has been sacked. A statement says he breached the terms of his appointment and lost the confidence of the Home Secretary. And police looking for a suspect in a chemical attack in South London have retrieved a body from the River Thames. Detectives believe it is Abdul Azadi based on the clothing. LBC weather, light rain in the south, overnight clear and cold in the north with heavy rain and strong winds, a low of 1. A wet and windy morning for most, drier and brighter later on, a high of 13.
LBC.
tiled.
8:35. Rob Blackie has just admitted to reading a book on sewage, which I said must be mandatory for Liberal Democrats, given that is one of their big policies at the moment. Now, Rob Blackie, you are standing as Liberal candidate for London Mayor. What on earth made you do it, given the track record of Liberal Democrat candidates? Shall we say is less than stellar?
I opened up a Casey report into Metropolitan Police last year, which is all about all the failings of Met. And there was a quote in there from a serving police officer saying, if you look at our performance on convictions for rape and sexual offences, they may as well be legal in London. And I read that. I could not believe how bad it was. If you dig into it, the conviction rate has halved in the last 8 years. It was never good. It's got much worse. And I really couldn't just stand on the sidelines for that.
OK. Now, whenever we have a London mayoral candidate, we like to have a little quiz. So let's see if you do better.
It's the second LBC quiz in a week.
Is it? Oh, well, let's see if you do better on this one than you did on the first. What's the bus fare in London?
£1.75.
Correct. How much does the average ambulance driver earn in London?
Average?
Yeah.
Say about 35,000?
30.
OK.
So not too far off. Can you give me the 6 new names for the London Overground lines?
Windrush, Suffragette, Mild May, and would I forget the other 3?
Well, you've done very well. 3 out of 6 is not too bad. Liberty, Weaver and Lioness.
Oh, yeah.
So are there 6 overground lines? I didn't even know
They've
that.
split the weird ones that used to be trains into...
Pretty weak names. I think you need to commit. If you become London Mayor, you get better names than that.
Yeah. Oh.
Right. The other panellists on the programme tonight are Zoe Strimpel from the Sunday Telegraph, SNP MP Kirsty Blackman and Conservative MP Sir Conor Burns. A text question from Cameron in Solihull. Who or what is to blame for so many councils being completely skint? Now, almost all local authorities across England are raising their council tax by the maximum 4.99%. I think it's 21% in Birmingham. Birmingham City Council are planning to impose the largest cuts to council services ever seen, involving dimming streetlights, reducing bin collections and saving 23 million from the adult social care budget. I'm assuming, Kirsty, the situation in Scotland is vaguely similar?
We've frozen council tax, so it won't be going up.
So councils aren't as skint in Scotland as they are in England?
There's still issues with funding. Absolutely, there's issues with funding. And you know, to answer the actual question about why councillors are skint, not councillors. It's to do with the fact that austerity has been biting for so long. You cannot keep cutting and cutting public services and expecting those services to continue to run in the way that they did. So the reality is that councils don't have enough money, and the Scottish Government doesn't have enough money because of constant austerity and underspending.
So how come Scottish councils are freezing their council tax? Surely it would be a natural thing to do. If you haven't got enough money, you've got to raise more money through council tax.
Because the Scottish Government has decided that in a cost of living crisis, we cannot do that to people. People cannot afford.
But you're putting income tax up in Scotland?
To have their council... income tax is different in Scotland than it is in England. And if you... No, it's not. It's absolutely not. If you are earning least in Scotland, if you earn less, if you're on the lower end of the income tax, you pay less income tax than you would in England.
Everybody else pays more.
You pay less income tax than you would in England, and these are the people that are struggling the most, the ones with the lowest salaries, or the ones that are relying on social security.
Scotland is getting significantly more in government grant than England?
Sorry?
Isn't it true that Scotland gets a lot more per head of population than England?
Scotland doesn't get a lot more per head of population than England. No. Scotland has got, absolutely, it's got ruralities and things that make a difference. But, if you compare it to the amount of tax that we raise in Scotland, of the amount of the economic growth that we generate in Scotland, then absolutely not.
You find the figures are very high.
So your local council in Bournemouth, is that skint?
Well, it's a very interesting question, and it's one of those things that it's almost impossible to get at the bottom of it. If you look at Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, is it now? It's core spending power. That's gone up by 47.8% in cash terms since 2015, and that's up 19% in real terms. Yet tonight, as we gather here, they will be gathering in the council chamber in what's now called the Civic Centre, it used to be called the Town Hall, in Bournemouth, to set a budget, where I've no doubt that the Lib Dem-led administration will be crying poverty and cuts and all the rest of it. And it's quite hard to understand when you see that level of cash increase and real terms increase, how they've got to that position. Now, clearly there are massive pressures on adult social care. Clearly there are massive pressures in children's services. And we're seeing it also in special educational needs. And Iain, when you drill into some of the individual cases and you see the amount of money the council's now paying in care packages and taxi costs to get kids moved around to different care provisions and school provisions, it's eye-watering. So the pressures are definitely there. But of course, one of the biggest claimants on local government finance is the local government pension scheme. And that is where a lot of it goes.
So if those costs have gone up, if the taxi costs are there, if the care packages are requiring to be so significant, why isn't the UK government giving councils more funding in order that it can...
Because it's skint.
I mean, it doesn't have to run a balanced budget like the Scottish government does.
Well, it hasn't been running a balanced budget for a very long time.
Since the days of Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, I think. Zoe Strimpel.
I mean, I think there's my understanding, and could be not accurate, but I understood that over the last few decades there has generally been a move towards centralisation, and that Thatcher, I think, was keen on centralisation, and maybe I'm wrong about that.
Well, she was very keen on localisation, which was the whole idea of the community charge, but that didn't end well, of course.
But I think probably the answer to the question is the history of different governments wanting to centralise versus outsource to local governments, and then if you add austerity onto that, it's a mystery to me how local authorities make their decisions. So I don't think I can sort of furnish any kind of particular insight beyond that.
Rob?
There's a simple explanation here, which is local authorities mainly employ people. And if you want to keep people's wages up, you don't just increase their wages with inflation. You have to increase fair wages more than inflation. And if you don't do that, you can't recruit people to do things like social care. And of course, the side effect of that is that councils running out of money means that lots of services that prop up society are breaking down. One thing we see a lot of in London is a lot of support given to people with mental health problems who are adults has been cut back dramatically. Those are people who have maybe drug or alcohol addiction problems who some years ago would have got treated quite quickly, and now they don't. And the cost is borne by society because often those people cause a certain amount of chaos. For instance, shoplifting is very common amongst people who have substance abuse problems. So you save money on the council, but it's the police and the shops who pick up the bill there.
And then added to that, you've now got the UK government saying if care workers are coming here from another country, they can't bring their dependents with them. They're gleefully talking about how wonderful this is. We're struggling to get care workers as it is. It's really, really difficult to get care workers. Now saying if any of you want to come and work in our care system from another country, you cannot take your dependents. And crowing about it is just the most bizarre position. It makes absolutely no sense to me if you want to have adult social care work and for older people to be cared for.
Isn't it interesting that we don't ever then go on to talk about the numbers of people who are of working age and on various out-of-work benefits that is growing exponentially and has been for decades?
Do you have a magic way to fix that, though? Because that's extremely difficult. Governments have been trying to fix it for decades.
We seem to sort of have almost reached a consensus in society that we sort of park those people and we just then look to the rest of the world.
You're no longer talking about how wonderful the unemployment rates are and how low they are then?
There's record numbers of people in employment, and that's to be celebrated, but there is an unacceptably, in my view, high number of people who we seem to have just parked and accepted that they are not going to make a contribution to work. Yes, and but that is surely
back injuries,
surely that is a better way to approach it, and to put equal emphasis on that than attacking this idea of going around and ravaging the rest of the world.
I mean, Rob's right. They're not going to be our care workers tomorrow or next week. The amount of input that if you want to stop immigration of care workers, you don't want anybody coming from other countries to work in our care system, fine, right? But what are you actually going to do about it? How are you going to get these people that you say that are out of work that could be working in the care system to do? Have you worked in care? I mean, it's difficult working in care. I've been a care worker. It is a very, very hard job to do. It's incredibly physical. You're lifting people, you're cleaning them, you're doing a massively physical job. So somebody who is a disabled person and is out of work because of that, right? How are we going to get them working in the care system? It's not going to happen. It's not possible.
No, it wouldn't for somebody like that. You're absolutely right. But I think to just sort of dismiss the idea that there is this growing group of people, many millions of people who are now not either in employment, education or anything else, but have decided for whatever reason, it may be medical reasons for many of them, but not all. And I think COVID had something to do with this, where some people decided, you know what, I quite like the idea of not working.
If you can afford to out of your own money, that's up to you to do that. But I think...
but a lot of the people in this situation are claiming benefits, which you and I are paying for.
Well, the overwhelming evidence for those people either have a mental health problem or a physical health problem.
Yep.
Both of which
I'm not denying that
treatment.
many people do have medical problems, and I would be the first to say, obviously, they shouldn't be going back into the workplace. But I think all stats show that there are many, many people who could work but are not working.
There's a sort of double thing of sort of COVID exacerbating the sense of mental health crisis, even when maybe a generation ago that wouldn't have been considered any reason that you wouldn't work. The particular thing, far be it, who knows. But also the whole culture and relationship to work changed in COVID big time. And as you say, people, there's a much more, this quiet quitting idea, there's a sort of opting out idea. And at the same time, an aging population and all these other pressures that are like massively straining resources on the local level. So it's like it's a pincer movement, it seems.
Well, that provoked a discussion, Cameron. Well done for the question. We'll come on to some more in just a moment. It's 8:47.
This is LBC.
The Lib Dems after
Right, Conor Burns is with us, Rob Blackie, Zoe Strimpel and Kirsty Blackman. Right, let's go to a text question from Chris in Staines, and I think this is more or less directed at Conor. Are the trade deals with the government that the government is discussing with certain US states nothing but smoke and mirrors in the absence of a UK-US trade agreement? Now, LBC's political editor Natasha Clark revealed last week that the Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch has begun discussions with the states of New York, Colorado and and Oregon, while deals are already in place with 7 states, Florida, Indiana, North Carolina, South Carolina, Oklahoma, Utah and Washington. However, the Biden administration has made clear it has no interest in negotiating a full Anglo-American trade deal prior to November's presidential election. Well, Conor, you are the Prime Minister's envoy to the US for regional trade and investment, so presumably you have something to do with this.
Yeah, and I have the great pleasure and privilege, authorised by Kemi, to sort of oversee this programme. And so, are they a substitute for a US-UK federal free trade agreement? No, they're not. They're not legally binding, but what they do allow you to do is to drill in and have bespoke sectoral-led agreements that focus on the synergies, the complementarities between the UK and an individual state. And they then allow you, when you've identified those priority sectors, to link regions and cities within the UK to mayoral and county areas within states and get exchange going. And exchange, human exchange, is the basis of commerce and trade. Your colleague who tweeted about that the other day, I saw a couple she missed, slightly bigger ones actually, that were in the guts of. It's one of those truisms that the best way to keep a secret is to make a speech in the House of Commons or put it on Twitter. I was in Texas and California in January on behalf of the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State, which might give you a clue as to which the bigger ones are that they missed. But they're dealing with the reality that currently the Biden administration is not prioritising free trade agreements. But what they also do, Ian, is they are instruments of informing us that when we get to the point of having an administration who wants to engage in a free trade agreement, that we will be the best prepared in understanding how to remove those barriers of trade, those market access barriers, and have one of the best free trade agreements eventually that we can ever have.
Why do you think that it seems to be a pastime in this country for people to look down their noses at trade agreements?
I honestly don't know, because trade creates jobs. Jobs bring dignity to human beings and families. They pay taxes on profit in business, the cornerstone of what we do in human exchange. And I don't know.
We have just gone through the Brexit years of many, many years of being told actually free trade wasn't that important, because if it was, we'd have stayed in the EU.
Yeah, we did leave.
The whole argument for leaving the EU was a good thing to do, relied on trade not being that important.
Exactly.
But we've rolled over, I think, 66 trade agreements and improved on quite a few of them.
We've worsened our trading arrangements with the biggest people.
That is true.
That's the biggest market in the world.
But I mean, when you read when we sign an agreement with a particular country, and the main point of the article is say, oh, well, that's only going to increase our GDP by 0.03% over 5 years, which sounds a pathetically small amount. But to those people whose businesses can increase because of it, and to those people who get jobs because of it, it's quite important.
That's absolutely true. But if I run like a few hundred metres after eating a massive curry, I will have burnt off maybe 5 calories, but I have still eaten a massive curry. And what we've done here is we've taken out a huge chunk of trade and made ourselves way less efficient at that. And we're making these tiny, tiny gains that are really quite trivial.
So how do you account for the fact that the most recent figures indicate that our trade with the EU has actually gone up?
But it's not going up as fast as it would.
Well, you don't know how fast it would have gone up. It's actually,
we can benchmark against other countries.
It's actually gone up.
We can benchmark against competitor countries.
You're speculating it could have gone up faster, but it has actually gone up.
But we can see that our competitor countries
and we are now free to
negotiate these
bilateral agreements with parts of the world, countries in the world, where the growth rates are going to be unparalleled with what we can get.
And the bilateral agreements also have got negatives as well as positives, right? So
all trade agreements,
that's the basis of trade.
That's, I mean, you're talking about the 0.3%, 0.003% or whatever, but also, you were mentioning the fact that some people will get jobs as a result of this. Well, yeah, but some people will lose jobs as a result of this. The way that the New Zealand one was done, for example, and the stuff around there, the impact on our farmers is massive. It was a significant impact on our farmers, significant negative impact on our farmers. So, actually, I think it's realistic to discuss the positives and the negatives of all of these things, but you need to do both, rather than just saying...
No, absolutely, completely accept that. And I think there probably are some defects with some of the trade agreements, but you're never going to get a trade agreement that is universally 100% beneficial to one country. That there have got to be trade-offs.
We were promised all these bonanzas, right? We were promised a Brexit bonanza. We were promised it would open up trade with the rest of the world, right?
Which it has done.
But nothing compared to the trade that we had before. And
we've just conceded that trade has actually gone in volume, has gone up.
But I think people wanted to. There was a clear trade-off. People wanted political sovereignty, and they were willing to kiss goodbye to the obviously superior trading bloc that is the EU, because the voters felt that they would be gaining something more important, and that there would be freedom to establish these other trade agreements. Now, I mean, clearly losing the ease of trade with the EU's economically in the short term have been difficult, but that it wasn't just done. Brexit wasn't sort of negotiated and sort of hashed out simply as a question of what will make us richer and trade better, because if that had been the case, nobody would have voted for it, I don't think. So other things kind of came to the fore. But I also wonder if there's a cultural discomfort, just to answer your question as to why people like to look down their noses at trade.
Well, I just think it's a national pastime, and we always like to see the worst of everything.
But isn't there also the sense that anything to do with like a trade deal might be kind of inherently grubby or especially with America,
rich friends,
right? In America, especially. I mean, but they don't really want to have much trade with us, it seems. But I think there's a very interesting cultural thing there about Britain and trade and money, even though we were like the 19th century was the kind of heyday of them.
Well, we did have decades when everyone told us how terrible the EU was, and by definition, when they were doing that, they weren't saying all the benefits of trade.
It's interesting when Iain asked about trade agreements, you immediately just went into the whole thing of the EU. You haven't said a single positive thing.
It was the biggest thing. It was the biggest trade agreement we had.
You haven't said a single positive thing about
I'm sure they are great, but they are they're inevitably going to be tiny by comparison.
The thing that I can never remember all the letters, the TCCP, TP, whatever it is, we could, and over the long term, that ought to be a massive benefit to us. But we wouldn't have been allowed to do that if we were still members of the EU.
But we'd have still been able to have trading agreements with those countries.
And
not like the EU doesn't trade with China.
We couldn't negotiate anything.
That's right.
We couldn't negotiate it by ourselves.
I remember going to Chile and the minister asking me why we couldn't do something on olive oil, and he smiled at me and said, because of course you have to prioritise your olive oil producers in England. And that was the difference between bilateral trade agreements and EU trade agreements. We were able to do our own thing.
Right, let's move on to our fun question from Justin in Hackney. The actor who played Malcolm in Malcolm in the Middle has now taken up NASCAR racing. Which hidden talent have you got to surprise us with? Now, you're a big fan of Malcolm in the Middle, aren't you?
I love Malcolm in the Middle. I've watched every episode repeatedly. And actually, normally when I'm doing
Is this what passes for fun?
So normally when I'm doing data entry during elections, so I'm sitting there typing stuff into the computer, and it's quite boring. And I've got Malcolm in the Middle.
Do you not have people to do that for you?
No, that's not how it works. No, I knock on doors as well and deliver leaflets and do everything.
I understand that one. Okay, so what's your hidden talent?
So I'm going to go for two. Firstly, I sew my own clothes quite a lot, and secondly, I'm getting really good at Assassin's Creed.
What?
Assassin's Creed. It's a computer game.
Okay, young people, Conor. What's your hidden talent?
That's a tough one. I love snooker. And I used to be really quite handy on the full-size table. I could get a break of up to sort of 60 or so in my prime. And, when I watch the current opinion polls and what might happen later this year, I'm sort of reminded of it. This is optimistic, the similarity between snooker and politics, that when the reds are all gone, when the green's gone, when the yellow's gone, the blue's still there.
Very good. That'll get clipped. Rob?
Well, when I'm not being Lib Dem mayoral candidate, I run a campaign that sneaks news into Russia to help Russians find out what's going on in Ukraine.
Really?
And Of course, to do that, I've had to I've got about 100 people who do it with me. Strangely enough, 95 of them don't want their names in the public domain. So we've become extremely good at doing things secretly and sneakily, and at learning from criminal spammers about how you get around rules to place adverts in Russia. So I think I could actually have another career as a criminal spammer.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that. So have you been sanctioned yet?
I haven't, actually.
You will be now.
You will be now. Sorry.
Well, nothing as exciting as that, but sort of slightly related to the former Soviet bloc. It's not really a talent, but a sudden enthusiasm for chess that kind of really took me over about a year and a half ago, which, if you know me, is very unexpected. A slightly more... another one might be, I'm very good at going into absolutely freezing water, even water with ice in it, just in a swimsuit and enjoying it.
You should meet Sheila Fogarty. She does that sort of thing. It's mad.
I depend on it. It's crucial for my sanity.
I was desperately then trying to think, have I got a hidden talent? And the only one I could come up with was knitting. My grandmother taught me to knit.
I can't knit. It's far too difficult. I can crochet.
I used to knit scarves.
Two sticks is so confusing. Yeah, crochet just has one.
I can knit, but I can't eat with chopsticks. Chinese food. Anyway, enough of that. Thank you all for coming in tonight. Conor Burns, Rob Blackie, Zoe Strimpel and Kirsty Blackman. On tomorrow's panel, we have the broadcaster Sir Trevor Phillips, the anti-female genital mutilation campaign in Nimco Alley, and the Conservative MP Matt Warman. So do tune in for that at 8. Coming up in the next hour, David Cameron, Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, has visited the Falklands this week, which I think is quite a surprise given what's going on in the world. And that's been described as a provocation by an Argentinian governor. Now, the Foreign Secretary's trip was part of a high-profile demonstration showing that the islands referred to as Las Malvinas by Argentina are part of the British family. I want to ask, how far would you go to protect the Falkland Islands? Because the new Argentinian president has been making some fairly hawkish remarks about sovereignty, etc., as you might expect him to do. But what would happen if Argentina decided to repeat 1982? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the government's tabled an amendment to a motion by the SNP, which is calling for an immediate ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict. Ministers would